Glad you're here. Thanks for venturing out on a cold December night. But I'm really looking forward to having this conversation and even, as you can see, capturing a little bit of this conversation. So if you don't know me, I'm Ryan Gillum. I work here at FAB, and there's plenty of information about FAB. I'm not going to make you go through it. I want to get us started. And I just want to say, this is a special night for us. This is the first time we collaborated on the program with Village Preservation. Really happy to do that because they were pursuing such an interesting topic here. And the book, Democracy is Creative Practice, that Andrew's the co-editor of, we think is a really sort of timely discussion about how we're all figuring out how to keep democracy, on its feet and staggering forward despite the challenges that it's facing. So there's going to be two parts to the evening. I'm going to kind of come back and help you orient to part two, but we're going to start off with a conversation right here with these folks. And Juan is going to get us started.
Thank you so much, and thank you. It has been great collaborating with Ryan on this, and this would not have been able to put it together had it not been for her. So this is greatly appreciated. I'm Juan Rivera, Director of Special Projects at Village Preservation. We have literature outside, but I am duty bound to give you an introduction regardless. So if you're not familiar, we are a nonprofit for the past since 1980, we have been fighting to preserve, document, and celebrate the architecture and culture of Greenwich Village, East Village, and Down. We have helped secure the landmark designation of over 1,300 buildings. We support local independent small businesses, and what else? Oh, wow, and we do programs like this. We do over 80 programs like this that are free and open to the public. So if you like what we do, I would encourage you to become members. You can do so at villagepreservation.org. And even if you are not ready to become a member, I would still encourage you to visit villagepreservation.org, where you can find a vast amount of digital resources, from oral histories to historic image archives to digital maps, where you can learn, you can find out more about the incredible history of the buildings and the people who have shaped these neighborhoods. And artists loom large among those people. 110 years ago, the godfather of art provocation, Marcel Duchamp, along with painter John Sloan and some poet and actor friends, they make their way into the Union Square Arch. And they went up the spiral staircase. And when they got to the top, these arch conspirators, they issued a declaration for the creation of the free and independent Republic of Washington Square. And having done that, they spread out these blankets, they affixed Chinese lanterns and red balloons to the parapet, they fired off cap guns to celebrate the occasion, and they spent the evening in pleasant conversation sipping tea. The declaration did not quite catch on, alas, and the neighborhood remained part of the city, the state, and the nation as a matter of legal fact, if occasionally not, perhaps in spirit. But I think of this incident as sort of the apotheosis of a kind of cultural gesture, as a cultural act as political gesture, and as emblematic of this model's virtues, its shock value, its evocativeness, its panache, and emblematic as well its limitations, its transience, its insularity, its gesticularism, I guess, to quote a word that doesn't exist. And I think of it also as exemplifying a widely held view of the nexus between politics and art, and as serving as a useful foil for the work that Andrew has done in democracy as creative practice. Andrew Zitcer is an urban scholar at Drexel University in Philadelphia, and a dear friend. And his work recenters the conversation about the relation between arts and politics away from things like the boldness of an aesthetical political vision and towards a less glamorous political function that art might play. That of helping develop a public capacity for democratic engagement, and that of helping weave a democratic ethic into the fabric of everyday life. So that raises all kinds of interesting questions. First of all, what exactly does that mean and what does it look like? But Andrew has thought about these questions far more and far greater depth than I have. So to get us to start thinking about democracy as creative practice, he's going to lead this conversation. And then to make that conversation complete, we have invited distinguished guests from local cultural institutions. Maura Nguyen Donahue from from Great Jones Repertory, Molly Garfinkel from City Lore, Pepe Flores and Lynn Pentecost from La Sala de Pepe. And with that, I'll hand it over to Andrew.
Thank you, Juan. Thank you, Brian, and everyone for joining us and for our panelists. I think the only thing I really would take issue with in Juan's introduction is the idea that there would be less glamour. I think we could still have a lot of glamour, right?
Exactly.
You know, maybe a little glitter, some glamour and glitter. My name is Andrew, and I am visiting from Philadelphia, and I thought just to kind of get this off, we don't have a ton of time because we have a part two. I will just tell you a couple things about me and then about this book project called Democracy as Creative Practice, Weaving a Culture of Civic Life. In terms of my own story, I became involved in Philadelphia's arts community, helping start a community arts center at the intersection of the Penn, University of Penn campus and the West Philadelphia neighborhoods that had a very strained relationship with the university due to urban renewal and all sorts of inequality. And one way to put those different configurations of people together is to open the doors to a deconsecrated church that the university was sitting in mothballs and just invite people to make things together in space. And the way that we did that was by not having students drive that bus and program it, but to offer community curators and musicians and artists who were already active in Philadelphia an opportunity to take one of Penn's spaces and make it something that they could sort of dream into. And so that space has been going for about 25 years and it still exists. And it's a very weird anomaly. People say, well, how do you do that? I said, I don't think other people have universities giving them buildings and funding without questions. So it's probably not replicable. So it's maybe not a great example, but in other ways, its persistence, its quiet persistence is a testament to the great demand that people have to live an expressive life together. And so from that, I was able to become part of cultural organizing in Philadelphia for almost 30 years and supporting small arts organizations and cultural organizations and religious organizations through just my teaching, my research, and my public engagement. And so that, in turn, many, many years later, led to a set of conversations around the strain on democracy that is not new but has become more strained, and the strain in the way people encounter the arts. If they're members of a public that don't feel sort of like art competent or curatorially, stamped with approval for the way they express themselves culturally. And my collaborators in this project and I started to talk about how, well, democracy isn't really a thing that's out there that you vote for once in a while. You throw your vote into the void, and if it comes back with the thing that makes you safe and happy, like great. And if not, well, I guess we just have to hope we get another chance to vote later to see if we can get those things back. And if democracy is not that, where do we find it? It's not something out there, it's something that's in here. So how do we have practices of democracy in our relationships, in our families, in our churches, and our mosques, and in our workplaces? Because if we don't have democracy in all of those places, why would we think throwing the vote into the machine that makes democracy will spit out democracy? That's like an exception. So this needs to be something that we make together every day. Also, arts is like that. It's not this thing out there that's done by artists, and artists aren't workers or people or neighbors. They're us, and some of us will practice really hard and then eventually try to make a go of making a living at it. But that's kind of like a gradient, not a hard designation of artists and non-artists. You know, if we live in a creative city, does that mean the city next door is an uncreative city? So if we're gonna pull democracy back into this room and to our bodies and together, what if we pull arts and culture and creativity back with it, and to those who feel distant and uncomfortable with the way we set up our cultural organizations, let them know that they're just as responsible and also able to be creators and cultural participants and cultural producers as they are to be democratic citizens. Can we do those two things together? So we ended up putting a book of essays together written by artists and organizers in 7 different countries, 37 people, I think. And they wrote about their experiences, the hard parts, the great parts of doing this work in all their different contexts. And there's a lot more to say about that book, which you can find online if you look for it. The more important thing is that in the year plus since the book came out, I've been invited to present sort of artists facilitated and artist experiential events like we'll have in part 2, and every single one is different because it's about who we're collaborating with. And the news flash is that this idea of artists as catalyst, artists as translator, artists as navigator, artists as provocateur is not unique. It is very widespread. It happens in all the cities we go to, and many, many cities more. So if that's the case, well, okay, so how can we give this to everybody? This stuff that all of you are involved in. It's thriving here, it's rooted here in this neighborhood, but how come I want every neighborhood, everywhere to have a version of what this place has. So that's why I'm so glad to be here with you all tonight and to join you in New York City and downtown tonight. And so that is our pivot to this conversation. And for a question, I think for the first question, the story that Juan told about Duchamp and his compatriots it was about those artists, not about an audience. There's no audience there. They went to the top, then they came down and had tea. So when you are thinking about the work you do in cultural spaces, who is the community that you're doing it for and with? Who is the audience? Are those two terms the same? Are they different? Who's out there when we make things? And please feel free to root that right in your own experience. It's not a theoretical. Who can start us off?
Okay. Does this work? Yeah, okay, can you hear me? I don't even know if it's on.
Yeah.
Yeah, this one is, there's a button.
I'm in visual arts, not technology.
So, I'm in Pentecost, I'm with the Solidarité, but I have, I'm a kind of a serial entrepreneur because I've founded a number of nonprofit organizations, arts organizations that are community focused and in the East Village, because I've lived here for ever and ever. And I do want to say that my first one was, the money came from Cougar Union and they gave me a building too when I was in school. So you're not the only one.
So maybe it'll happen again.
I think, yeah, I've been president and I'm working on it. But I just want to say that, when I think of democracy as creative practice, I want to, in my mind, flip it around and say creative practice as democracy. Because when we think of democracy, we just think of the structure, like you said, of an electoral state. But I think of particularly the East Village, Lower East Side as the best of civil society. And that's what democracy allows us to be. And I was just quoting Andrea because I read your paper again about the arts, that, you know, this neighborhood is unique because a lot of us put down roots back when nobody wanted to live here. And so we have 145 arts organizations, 59 community gardens. I mean, this is the center, the epicenter of what, like you said, the rest of the country could and should be. And I think people come here and then they go away and say, oh yeah, I can do that in somewhere in Pennsylvania, you know, or Braddock or wherever, you know, they're doing it in small scales, or Market, Texas, or whatever. But we're the godmother of all of that. And I just want to say that for all of the organizations that I founded and worked in for like 50 years or more, right now I'm just so happy that Pepe and I, and he'll tell you about the Sala de Pepe, got together, because La Sala de Pepe is exactly what it sounds like, Pepe's living room. And Pepe moved his living room down to the street and opened the door, because it started people knocking on his door on the 4th floor. And it's like a model that got us, after years of working in the nonprofit sector, which is, I know Pepe from the education realm, it got us to a point where there were no more rules. We're like, we could be as anarchistic as we wanted. If you saw Pepe sitting inside or me, knock and come in, and that's how so many collaborations we've had, and we're only 3 years old. The organization we've had have been people walking through the door with a good idea. And before you know it, we were having a film screening, or a book talk, or a baby shower, or a photography show, or a dance party, and I'll let Pepe tell you more.
Do I have to use this?
I think so, this is for the recording and for.
Oh,
You should.
Well, Lena and I first met today in a daycare which was named Children's Liberation. I mean, when people heard that name, they said, what is that? And it was a way to liberate children of all the garbage that they were getting and this is preschoolers. So we were sort of like preparing them for this environment, for this neighborhood. And the other day, Lynn sent me a photo of a ticket that we had a dance party to raise money. And it was because we were in the street selling cupcakes, you know, to raise a cake sale. And then Lynn looked at me and said, Pepe, is there a way that we, you know, what she called me was, I think she called me was in those days. And she said, is there any way that we can do an event and not be here screaming our lungs out, you know, with the cold? I said, okay, let's do a salsa dance. And of course, this neighborhood was fed up of a lot of salsa musicians. So we ended up doing that, and we raised over $3,000 or $4,000 in one night that would take us 2 years, because we were making like $100 in each cake shop if we were lucky. So that was our first collaboration, and we did other events, and that daycare was special because there was no outside board. Once you became a parent or a teacher in that school, you became part of the board. So that there was some empowering of the people. People felt empowered. You had a voice, and whatever you had a chance to give an opinion, and most likely you were listened to. And through the years that I've been here, I moved here because I was in Puerto Rico and I got involved in radical politics over there, and I was forced to leave. And I ended up in the Lower East Side. Lo and behold, it was like being in Puerto Rico in a way, because in those days Puerto Ricans were like we were. It was a lot of Puerto Ricans there. However, there was no representation in City Hall. Okay, and you know how we got the people to vote? Salsa music. We used to have dance concerts on Avenue D and 10th Street, Soul Plaza. And then we brought these bands, the best salsa bands, and people would come down, and that's what we practically forced them to register. And the thing is that people probably wanted to vote, but they were not registered. So that's how we started voting for Latinos or people from this side of town to be part of the council. So, and the other part was the gardens. But I was involved in whatever it was. I was involved because I believe in grassroots organizations. I believe in us getting involved and making changes, not somebody to come and tell me, vote for me and I'm going to do this for you. No, I'm going to vote for you, but you have to listen to us when it's time to fill our needs. And our needs and still are affordable housing, education, decent education, health issues, particularly, and that's the thing, like that, the Nina is a clinic on Thursday that's been there for a long time. That was also a community initiative. So this neighborhood, to me, was the best place that I could come because there was a lot of work to do. There was a lot of things to get involved in. And then the gardens, like I was telling, I think it was her, and Lynn was on 9th Street, that garden on 9th Street and Avenue C. And those were dumps. I mean, before we could make a garden, those were dumps. I mean, we put cars, refrigerators, all kind of shit out of there to make those gardens, working. And then I was commenting to her that I think we have the highest density of gardens in the United States, from 14 to Houston, from Avenue A to Avenue D. And then, of course, there's more sprinkled around. But down the block, I mean, we didn't know this, but actually what we were creating loans for the neighborhood because we had that condensing plant at the end of Avenue C. And if you live there, you see all the shit that comes out of those chimneys, which is not convenient. And that's the high amount of asthma, children with asthma, and adults. So to me, this is it's always been people's participation, and then in La Sala, we had a few meetings from the Democratic Club. We had baby showers, and we had from the most serious thing to the most funny thing, or and the beauty of it was opening the doors and people see that the door is open, they would come and sit down and just talk about the music or whatever. I remember there was a lady, she would come and sit down and ask me, can you play Los Panchos? Los Panchos is a famous bolero trio from Mexico, which was founded in New York. So that's another story about the music.
And this is such great history.
And she would sit there, she wouldn't say a word. And at the end of she would get up and leave without saying a word. And to me, that was perfect. Great. Thank you.
I love that. It was great. And so much to think about. And just so deeply appreciate that deep knowledge and that deep experience in this neighborhood. And great storytelling, which is, I think, a really important part of all of this. At City Lord, we do quite a lot of things, and just to sort of get back to your question of who is community and what is the difference between community and audience, I think for us there really isn't any, and especially in thinking to really piggyback back on what Peter was saying about our education program, which is across all 5 boroughs, and also to think about Pepe's conversation about representation. I think for us, one of the most important things that we can do is influence the politics of the sandbox. And there's a quote from an article in the Places Journal that came out about a decade and a half ago about architect party and representation for female identified people in the architecture world. And actually, as it happens right now in City Road, we have an exhibition of Lower East Side photographs by Clayton Patterson and Martha Cooper. And Martha Cooper, who's a photographer, who's been active, was our director of photography for a very long time. She's not from the neighborhood, but has lived in New York since the 60s. She has a collection of photographer Barbies. And so Barbies that have some form of a camera or a whole kit or a video camera, and that dates back decades, much further than you might even expect. And I think that's just a very, very specific way of talking about how we try to, in our education practice, forefront the student's own practice, and not only, and also not to move too far away from this, but to very much blur the lines between art and culture, and because to identify as a culture bearer doesn't necessarily mean that you are a working artist, and also just because you are not a working artist doesn't mean you're not an artist. And to talk, as you said, Andrew, with the students about sharing what it is that they practice at home and try to infill where that's not represented in curricula, in textbooks, et cetera. Of course, it's especially important now. But to encourage, dialogue and intersectionalities, students seeing something that they practice at home as somehow related to somebody else's practice, and then it's about, of course, confidence building and tolerance and engagement and curiosity and respect. So that's, yeah.
And thinking, I'm here as Great Jones Rep, which is La Mama's resident company next door, but I'm actually really full of this question because of my day job. I chair the dance department at Hunter College and direct the MFA, and we were giving feedback to our composition 2 student choreographers today. And there were a couple of works that are very actively using social forms. And so I used the word community several times today when talking about this work. Because in dance, I don't necessarily think that the act of sitting and watching a dance about democracy makes me like more democratic, participant. But I do think that dancing together is how we embody and activate and understand what those things mean. Because of the, if it's like a European symphonic concert model of you sit and then I do, then we're in this really specific like labor relationship, and we're not participants, which was what Pepe was talking about in terms of participation, where I think that's where we actually really activate ourselves. And so for me, that when we're dancing and we're dancing in a way that we understand that we are actually together with other people and we're doing something collectively, then we're coming to understand, like sensorially, like in the sensation of the body and in our sort of discomfort and in our sharing, what maybe practices of democracy are supposed to be like. Because I think a lot of people love this idea of democracy, but it requires participation. And so for me, in the artistic realm, it's an invitation to be participant within the work. And so the question of audience also gets really complicated.
Thank you. That's all very rich. And I think dance feels essential to this stream of and Pepe brought up Dance Avenue, seeing dance parties. I think democracy is not a spectator sport, and it's also not about getting along and agreeing. It's about negotiating the distance between where you stand and where someone else stands. And that means accommodating each other's needs and allowing for a kind of mutuality and also feedback. And that's what I see dancers who are responsive doing all the time. And to me, that's when we've done a lot of these democracy events with artist facilitators, movement has been a huge part of it, and things come up. Someone says, I have an invisible disability, and the way you're all moving around the room carelessly or apparently carelessly is making me feel physically unsteady and unsafe. And that creates a moment that a facilitator, who might be a choreographer, but might be a social worker or a surgeon or something, is able to step in and be part of that conversation of of making that experience work for everybody to the best that we can. And that is that, you know, that's to get to your point, that it's the creative practice of democracy, not only, you know, it goes both ways. So I think maybe to jump from there, let's talk about how it goes if people call what you do political art or art that's about politics, or it's, you know, how do you think about that question of, you know, is the art political, we shouldn't do art that's about, you know, how do you balance those things? Because I've definitely been getting a lot of those kinds of questions. Well, you know, are you just out here sloganeering and talking about, you know, how people should think, and how do you balance the questions around the place, the neighborhood, the political, the electoral, and the, you know, the definitions? Do you make political art? Do you support political art in Culture Barry?
Do you want to start? I mean, I can start. I think I didn't know I was making political art. I just thought I was making work that was about the life that I was living and what I was experiencing. And then inherently I had no choice but to be political because of how I even came to this US. I was born in Vietnam. You know, there's just no way that me telling even a personal story wasn't going to be about politics of American imperialism, and you know, so that just I just had no choice. So I think decades into it, that's just, it's always there. And then I guess the question for me as my practice has gone on is the work something beyond a representationally political, or is there some, this is a conversation I have with my sister a lot, is there an inherent call to action in the work, or is the work organized to be in partnership with an invitation to direct action, or to, so that's sort of where the politicalness of the work, I think, had shifted, although now I just feel like, just being is also political again. So that's sort of how it is.
Yeah, I think for us, and I want to confess, I myself am not a maker, but I think at City War, everybody on our staff, actually, I'm the only one that isn't a self-identified artist, and their practice, both as self-identified artists, their personal practice, and their practices, the work that they do through City War, has completely enriched the work that I do as the director of the Place Matters program, which is really the intersection of history, culture, community organizing, community advocacy, celebration. Sometimes that's the final goal. And I think that everything that we do, especially the place-based work, is inherently political. Especially, I mean, I wouldn't even say especially. I don't think that's especially true of this neighborhood or this city or this country. I think it's just uniqueness in Cartesian space is inherently political. But when when we're talking about communities, we're also not just talking about geographic communities. We're talking about linguistic communities or cultural communities that have common roots and heritages in other places, or practices or philosophies, and all of those have political valences. And so even if we're doing a presentation that is ostensibly sort of an exposition or a demonstration, a workshop, it's inseparable from the politics that either help to support or suppress that practice now, or support it or suppress that practice back in space and time. Andrew?
We're gonna just move over to the next. Let's maybe just wrap this question now. We're gonna move to our next, maybe you can have the last word
Okay.
for the first part now.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say that Pepe and I both came kind of out of the generation of more radical politics, and one of
Don't be
the,
afraid of the left.
from the left, well, from the radical left, okay. He had to leave Puerto Rico. Say no more, he'll tell you why. And when I was running my first community arts center, we worked with the Young Lords and the Black Panthers, because we have printing presses and the capacity. But the best thing we can do politically is share our histories at La Sala de Pepe with younger generation of the people in the Lower East Side who are taking over our community gardens, thank God. I mean, we're the people kind of supporting the emotionally and sometimes financially so that the work continues, and it is continuing.
Well, on that note, I wanted
let's
to.
go. Look at us. We come from different ethnic backgrounds, but we work together. And to me, it tells you a lot. It tells the people a lot. If these two can work together, and we come from different backgrounds, then everybody can work together. I think that would summarize the figures of this.
Thank you, Buffet. Thanks everyone on the panel. I just want to thank everyone, give them a hand. So I think in the spirit of democratic engagement, the idea was that we are not speaking for you, we're just speaking first. So we have a more participatory part of our rest of our evening. I'll turn it back to you, Larry.
Yes, so we are moving into a long table, and we're gonna do a couple things. We're gonna reorganize the room just a little bit. So we're going to move, you're the ones right here in this row, I've got my eye on, because we're gonna make a large circle of chairs.
Next to watch Lois Weaver. She has a 5-minute intro. She is the artist that developed the long table as a participatory creative project. And so we're going to watch her intro, and we're also passing out the etiquette. So once we do that, then we have a chance to look at the etiquette, and then I'll answer any questions before we get ourselves started. So, yeah.
Hello and welcome to The Long Table. This is a format that I've been working on since 2003. And it's a format, an alternative format for public discussion. It was born out of my own frustration with conventional formats for public discussion, like panel discussions, where it felt like to me that all of the expertise was on one side of the table and all the rest of us were on the other side. And I wanted to create a situation where we could honor the expertise that was in the room, that we could all come to the table and share our experiences and our knowledge. It was inspired by a film that I saw called Antonia's Line, which was made by a Dutch filmmaker called Vigorous. And in this film, a woman inherits her mother's home out in the country. And she's an urban woman, and she and her daughter moved to the country and set up a family and a life there. And they start to attract a lot of the eccentrics and outsiders who live in the community. And one of the recurring and central images in the film is the kitchen table, or the dining room table, or the dinner table. And each time we return to that dinner table in the film, the table gets longer and longer because they have accumulated more friends, more family, more eccentrics, until finally the table has to be taken outdoors. And this became a really important metaphor for me. I wanted to create a table for discussion that was similar to a dinner table conversation, but was held in public. And that's what the long table is. It's an informal format for serious conversation. There are a few sort of essential things about the format and about how to use the format. I've created an etiquette of not rules necessarily, but guidelines of how to behave at a long table, because I feel like the more we understand the structure, the more freedom we have to converse. So one of the first things about the table is that there are only 12 chairs at the table, but that table and those 12 chairs are surrounded by a group of chairs that are for spectators. Only 12 chairs at the table because that allows the table to moderate. There is no moderator, no one's going to keep us on or off topic, no one's going to pick up the threads of the conversation. It really is the table who keeps order, in a sense. And it seems as though if there are only 12 of us sitting around the table, we know how to behave and let one person talk at a time. The other thing about the long table is that anyone can come to the table to speak. All you need to do is to come to the table and inhabit a chair. If a chair is, all the chairs are full, you can just tap the shoulder and someone will give you the chair. The other really important thing about the long table is that there can be silence and there can be awkwardnesses. It isn't a kind of public event where we have to just keep the ball in the air all the time. There can be moments when we sit quietly and think about what is the next thing we want to talk about, what's the next thing that we want to say. I feel like that we're quite often very uncomfortable with silence in public. So this is a place where you can be quiet, think, and express yourself. You can also come to the table more than once. You can come to the table, have a talk, release your chair for someone else to come to the table, and if you get excited by something, come back to the table. The other thing is that it's a durational performance piece. And what I mean by that is that it will last for an hour and a half, 2 hours, depending on how you set that time. And at the end of that time, the table will finish. There will be no winding up, no rounding up. It will just end. And hopefully the conversations will extend beyond the table and beyond the room and possibly even into the bar. So I hope you have a good time. I hope you have a lively discussion. Feel free to go off topic. Feel free to sit quietly. Feel free to come and go and enjoy the choreography of what it means to bring your body into the conversation.
Take it easy, Pepe. It's going to be very short. You talk about silence. And I remember, to me, silence equals death.
So this is a dinner conversation. You can only speak when you're at the table. And we're looking for people to join you in a dinner conversation. I'll come chat with you. You were saying something about silence.
Equals death.
Yeah.
And that organization or that movement saved a lot of lives. And it took a lot of balls, or actually not a ball, but a lot of courage, because my particular role was to go to the shooting galleries and providing the works, what they call the works, or the syringes and things to clean the syringes. And I found that was an example of people taking action and getting results. Because otherwise, much more people would die, especially people in this neighborhood, people of low income, minorities, and at the beginning it was kind of scary, going into this space that was very violent. There was some sort of violence there. The people that were there, they didn't want nobody to mess around with what they were doing there. They just wanted to shoot up and leave me alone. So we had to go around them and try to convince them not to stop. I can make you stop, but to reduce the harm that you were doing, inflicting on yourself and other people. And that's what I had a lot of respect for that, whoever came up with that idea, because the government wasn't doing nothing. And that's how it was action into a situation that now we talk about AIDS, but back then it was very prevalent in this neighborhood.
So you're speaking so beautifully to direct community action, but the slogan that you shared, silence equals death, makes me think of the role of the artists during the AIDS activism movement in terms of creating visual imagery, creating replicable DIY signs and imagery that allowed that message to go with a direct action. So I'm glad that you evoked the language, because the first thing I see is that poster that was made by the collective. And so I really appreciate sort of bringing those two together in terms of where the artists can help advance that message in partnership with direct action.
And this silence equal death can be applied to other housing, affordable housing. It can be applied to lack of medical services. It can be applied to proper education. There's a lot of things that we can use that tool in benefit of the community.
I also, when you bring up silence equals death, I think there's also a very important, there should be a recognition of how silence also perpetuates harm. Mm-hmm. Right? We live in a time now when it takes a lot of bravery in any case to speak up about things that are wrong, but I feel like a lot of the reason why so many problems in the world are perpetuated is because of people's silence. There's a quote that sticks in my head when you say this about how it's not good versus evil, it's good versus apathy, right? Because evil can only persist because there's a bunch of people too scared to say anything or too scared to stand up. And I feel as if that is something that is often overlooked because a lot of folks will not speak up out of their fear to lose their comfort, right? So there's this silence equals you being comfortable a little bit longer even if someone else has to suffer. And I think that has a place in the, that we should at least also bring that into the recognition.
And Audrey Lord's language of your silence will not
Right.
I mean, it makes me think about like the urgency that was inside of Silence Equals Death of the ACT UP, and it had, and it makes me think about how important other people's wellness is in order to be acting, because how do we get beyond a level of self-interest, and even in something that was so important with the ACT UP and the AIDS activism and the concept of silence equaling death, it only mattered to those folks to whom it mattered, and that there was still plenty of folks that it's okay for this to be happening to others. And so it makes me think in these days of the way that like whistles and noisemakers and making noise when ICE is showing up into a neighborhood, that one of the things that we do is you have to get there and then you have to get really loud, and it's like this new version of the silence is equaling death action. But it's also just been an interest and like the way that protest happens, and to make sure that there's a kind of like noise making around it. But I don't know, I just keep having this experience of like when does one realize that it is in your own self-interest to move on behalf of somebody else's well-being? Because I don't think that's necessarily democratic. Like, I don't know if that's democracy or if that's really like collectivity or.
And that makes me think about
care.
In general. Just the way that I've observed how often in the world is that people have an idea of, I'm going to help you by doing something I think would help you. Not, I'm going to help you by asking what you need. Right? So I think that's a part of it. It's like directly fused into this individualized place where everyone is very, very super focused on themselves and only their well-being or their immediate, similar to like how they say men will not think about the woman that they're with romantically and how to treat them, but that they want to tell their daughters, this is how you get it, this is the right? You want to tell your daughter a different set of rules than you treat actual women with, right? So it's like, how do we break that cognitive dissonance? How do we like bridge that gap of understanding that like there is no difference between you and me, right? You might, maybe somebody has an extra couple $100,000, but like one tragedy can make us equal, or one tragedy, right? We saw this in the pandemic where now everybody is learning new ways of living because a lot of us thought that'll never be me, right? So how do we like bridge that gap of understanding and relativity so that we all resonate on an equal playing field with humanity?
I think that's also something in art making and art making in democracy is I think there's an impulse from folks to want to, go into neighborhoods and help and work with communities and sort of put on a sense of what that community might want in art making. And so this question of how are you making sure that you're working in solidarity with, in collaboration with, and not assuming what stories people want to tell rather than asking or hopefully waiting to be invited in the first place. But I think that sort of recognition of not putting on to people what help or what stories want to be told.
Well, I think some of the best art that's come out recently is in these No Kings demonstrations where individuals are just becoming artists because they got to get out there and make a statement. And it's really been incredible to see, people with over the highways hanging out their banners or doing murals or, just their signage and costumes and the theatrics behind it. Yeah, those blow-up alligators. Yeah, it's also creative. And I think these times, like fear kind of actually forces people to become creative because they have something to say. And it's easier to say it if you're part of a group, of a movement. And also I think that I think we're in unbelievably shaky times right now. And so I just want to say I went to an anti-ICE protest yesterday at my church where somebody had been taken and they're still trying to get him out. And it was like his husband was there. And, it was a trap, but down at the offices. But what really struck me, and I think it's like really brave, is that Johnny Williams, who is our, what's his role? Yeah, I mean, actually stood at a microphone and said, and I hadn't heard anybody say this like so publicly, but we're living through the Fourth Reich, and what are you going to do? And I thought, oh my God, it was both sad and bravery. I mean, it made me really like go, ooh, he might have a point. What are we going to do? And I think that art is just a wonderful communications vehicle for organizing.
It's interesting that New York City and Miami elected Democrats made, I don't know, let's see what happened at the end, but it's a new trend. I mean, it's sort of like there's hope, there's a light at the end of the tunnel, for whatever is going on in Washington. But it's a strong message, that probably it's going to be like fire in the prairie that's spreading. I think that there's an effect of the domino effect. We're hoping for that. But I think that these demonstrations and mass demonstrations have an effect on the general public. People that not necessarily go to a march or demonstration, but they see what's going on and they sort of start taking questions. Like what I was telling you before, in terms of like the people in the project that never voted, and Salsa inspired them to vote. Not big people. I don't know Salsa, but the things that they got motivated to vote through the music, and that's a form of art. And for us, for most people, a lot of people, music is they made a form of art.
I think Pepe's opening salvo made me think a little bit about this. You talking about our work saving lives, and I thought a lot about a lot of the American poets in this community that were intimately connected with the Latino and the broader civil rights movements that are still integral parts of what we need to stabilize our democracy, right? For people to have basic rights to education, to healthcare, to housing, to the ballot box. So yeah, I think kind of reflecting on what Lynn was saying, I think it's interesting to think about who are the artists doing this work and like what we can do to promote or elevate or kind of connect all these sort of dots in a way. I think because we're living in it, we don't really always know, so I'd be curious to know if people are thinking about that.
I think that's really interesting. I'm glad you sort of kicked this whole conversation off with the fact that silence equals death phrases is something that really has resonated with like things I've been thinking about a lot recently. Spent a lot of time this year working with visual aids, and we've been talking about, well, what does it look like to, the AIDS crisis exists, but is different than when that organization was founded. But then what is the role of an organization telling the story of struggle and organizing and crisis now? Because it feels so much like, well, this is both an unprecedented time, but also kind of quite precedented, right? Unfortunately, right? Like there have been many, many crises, and it seems very important to think about, well, how do we remember, maybe not always on the same, not always the same way, but that thing of division and pain and causing harm, and thinking that some people's lives are worth more than other people's lives is like a pretty long-standing tradition, right? So how do we look back and learn from those different kinds of organizing and organizing tools to say, well, what can that teach us now in this moment? Like, and what does that mean for thinking about the ways that organizing might happen really deeply in person? Like, what does that look like? Like all of those, and what is it? And even that kind of questions about, well, what role does harm reduction, right, in that context play in all of that kind of organizing, where it's like you might have to step into something that makes you feel really uncomfortable, but you know that the larger question is the thing that's really the most important. And so how do we kind of take from one context, and AIDS activism is only one version, right? There's a lot of other versions. So how do we like know enough about our own histories of activism and resistance, and then to be able to interpret and to think about it. This that's been very much on my mind.
Respectfully, I really think and feel that in 2025, for any of us to say we don't know how to solve these problems is a cop-out. Simply because of the years and years and years of schooling in which we learned that all of this stuff was wrong, right? We learned these things. History is literally repeating itself, and not even that far away from itself, right? This is like within my lifetime, which is around 40-something years, right? 40 years ago, people were going through this. 20 years before that, no, 40 years before that, there was this whole war, right, that we're now reenacting in all of these ways. And, you know, I've been sitting, listening into the world lately, and just really confounded by how we can allow ourselves to be so highly educated and also so willfully ignorant, to say we don't know what to do now. There's libraries and libraries and libraries full of books. What do we mean we don't know what to do now? I really feel as if there's a continued perpetuation sometimes, especially in this world of, if I can get away with just saying I don't know something, it'll be fine. Or like, it's because it's okay that you don't know something, people will choose that as their answer. Like, oh, I don't know, I just don't know, I'm not sure what to do. You know what to do. We've been here before, so how do we not know what to do, right? Like at some point, I feel like there has to be that, again, like that awareness that we are choosing to remain ignorant sometimes. We're choosing to remain comfortable. We're choosing to do things because, you know, I can't live without my $10 Starbucks. It's just so good. Like, it's not that good. It's just not, you know what I'm saying? Like, we know how to fight these things, and a lot of it comes down to where we put our money, our efforts, and our time, and our energy. And like in one of the organizations I work with, Wow, across the street, it runs off of sweat equity. This is a whole theater place that runs off of people dedicating their time to maintaining something like that. And it's been around for 40 years. So what that tells me is that there are people that have solutions. There are solutions here. We know how to apply these solutions. So really, I think a bigger question that a lot of us should really kind of maybe consider a little bit longer is, why are we pretending like we don't have these answers or like these answers don't exist?
Yes, and something that you said, and thank you for, wow, which is that we have libraries and libraries and libraries full of books for now. And so I want to also acknowledge like the extreme censorship that is happening and the effort to erase a lot of this history, particularly the history of movement organizing. And actually, wow, in particular, in a lot of the spaces, the cultural spaces in this neighborhood are both artistic homes and living archives. And so, like, Laura and I got to spend a weekend together at an archival symposium. I worked for Ping Fang, which was formerly Ping Chong, and you know, this idea of like archiving our history, our movement history, and our arts history, I think is so important, so that when we come back into these loops, or the ACT UP Collective and the graphic arts that they're making, and so just making sure that that is being preserved and archived in order that we can access it again if we are not trying to reinvent the wheel. And I know that that lab is like a huge contributor to that in this neighborhood as well. But it was the libraries and libraries full of books. My first people was like, yes, we do. And I'm like, ooh, but maybe.
But I mean, even in that respect, we have libraries, and yes, they are being censored, they are being destroyed, but that doesn't mean that we don't have the capacity to regurgitate what we already
And we have
know.
collective
To
knowledge.
write it down for ourselves. We have collective knowledge, we have experiential knowledge. We have the ability to like recall whatever we've learned. So like, I think a big part of that preservation is also for us to be secure enough in what we know and always trying to share some knowledge, because essentially everything will be erased at some point, but not if you keep it alive, and not if you decide you're gonna pass it on, or I'm gonna write it down and find another way to preserve it.
There is a movement in Puerto Rico. It comes from 60 years ago, and now has a name. It's called Los Muros Hablan. The walls talk. And they came to New York and they did some things in El Barrio, but in Puerto Rico it's very prevalent to use the walls to write messages. And it came to a point that it was outlawed. You know, people were getting arrested for it. And it was young artists that were the initiators and the people that took the courage to start writing on the walls as a way of protest. I don't see that much in New York, you know what I mean? But I think in Puerto Rico, Latin America, you see that a lot, this form of art.
And then there's been protests in Northern Ireland as well.
I'm sorry?
In Northern Ireland, the protest murals are a huge part of the rebellion
And to some extent, graffiti kind of extended that type of communication across.
Can I ask? I'm a visitor from Philadelphia, so I wanted to ask New Yorker folks a question. This group of neighborhoods around here in the Village and Lower East Side and these special places are known beyond this neighborhood as a place where these kinds of things happen, and they happened for a long time and they're still happening. So what are things that you wish other places could learn from the hard-won experiences of this? Like, why is it working, to the extent it's working here, what are the things that can be shared about this special place that maybe can be emanated out to other places?
Well, I'm sorry, I like to talk. But one thing that I have to say from La Sala, and that's something that I started seeing the function of young people that used to come to La Sala and talk to Viejo Mandani when nobody was talking about it. And you know, when finally he got elected, I added the whole thing. You know, it was all these young people that were all going around and spreading the word in a very, you know, not screaming, no postures. They would just come to La Sala and then there would be other people in there, and they would say, oh, who's that? And then, you know, things kept going, and look the result of that. And this is just in microcosm. of what's going on around the city in terms of young people participating in the process. And some of them were artists that were involved in this.
This is going to be an unpopular opinion. Perhaps it's for me. I don't think that the Lower East Side writ large is more special than any other community. And I think that we all have extreme privilege of, because I'm working here, I don't live here, is so much richness that people have, that has been documented, that has been named, that continues, that has been passed on from one generation to the next, but also hasn't, because this neighborhood has experienced so much change and turnover. It's both and, I think. You look at the South Bronx, when people said, there is no more South Bronx, it's burned down, there's nobody here. And my very good colleague Elena Martinez has used storytelling and all kinds of cultural capital, to use that terminology, and social capital and social fabric, to help organize community around, to the extent that it's possible, unwanted development, to create the Bronx Music Hall, which is now this tremendous monument to the cultural heritage of the neighborhood that not only New York, but the entire, sort of now, corporate universe trades off of hip-hop culture, graffiti culture, public mural culture, and to think that the place where this sort of was immediately and initially incubated would no longer be a stable environment for the people who created these art forms, these cultural forms, or perpetuated or made them popularized. One of the things that they're doing is trying to mitigate against that. But I think, in other neighborhoods that either we don't call them the name that they were called before, or we don't call them the name that the people who have long lived there called them, or we give them different boundaries. Community organizing and culture go hand in hand. They maybe haven't been documented in the same way, but in all kinds of, like what we call community anchors, churches, mosques, temples, etc. Definitely community gardens, even parks. And parks have a totally different valence than community gardens in New York. Community gardens have fences. They are stewarded by sort of semi-self-selecting communities. They are sometimes more culturally oriented. Parks are like the commons in a very different way. As you've been saying, the streets often are, stickball or like other street games. And I want to also call games and play into the space because there's so much about being a well-functioning civil society that is so parallel to play. Even for Plato talks about this and so many others, Homo ludens. And I think that what we understand about being in, being out, what the rules are, what the boundaries are, how to push them, how to start over, how to call it, how to time out. And there is so much also in many culture, in all the art forms, like the big disciplines that sort of get categorized with grants often, but in all kinds of cultural art forms and traditions, play and those kinds of rules of civicus are engaged. And I think you see those in other neighborhoods, again, with apology, you see that in other places, it just hasn't become the same story. And I do think that the storytelling and intergenerational ownership is really important. And I think that a question I have about that is, does it take people from the outside to name that and put it in a book or put it in a documentary, make an album, make an artwork about it? Because I think a lot of the way, and I'm hearing it a little bit in this conversation, is talking about artists engaging with communities and with permission and with buy-in and like stakeholders. But I think it's just the way that I think that artists funded and the way it's talked about and our private and public structures for supporting that work separate artists from the community. And I think that that the buy-in that is absolute and permission and engagement and many voices. I'm not saying consensus building, because we rightly already said like community building is not the same as consensus building. But to separate the artist as like a different entity from within the community is like not quite the narrative.
Well, I just want to build on that because I was just thinking about a remark of Brian Stevenson, who founded the Equal Justice Institute, EJI, down in Montgomery, Alabama. read some article in which somebody said, Ryan, how did you do that? How can you make this amazing museum, community, and education center happen? He said, well, you just have to stay in the same place for 20 years. And it's like, yeah, you have to be part of that community. Although when I went there, Molly Crabapple has this beautiful animation, and I mean, it provides a space for artists, but you can't just helicopter in without somebody in the community who really knows the lay of the land and has like a commitment.
I just want to give this block a little bit of love, though. And I'm thinking about, thinking about what happens on this block and the concentration of arts organizations and theaters. But I was thinking about the Kintakoying project that Fab did with Culture Hub, and about how this is like a really important indigenous trading ground, meeting place. And that I didn't know that until I saw an artistic project, which was a series of works being projected on buildings, of private men came to understand like the specifics of the land. And I feel like there's that also, like we're sort of remembering all of those pieces and then actually recognizing too that that's ancestral, but it's also contemporary, and that it's actually, that even a conversation like that becomes a very political conversation, and even remembering that there's a Lenape person sitting right next to me, or I'm collaborating with them, or working, like all of that is also really present, and I feel like that's part of this place. And then it keeps it alive in terms of like all of these arts organizations on this block.
Yeah, well, I think that's kind of like maybe the distribution of creative energy and creative spark is more evenly distributed in our society, and no one place is more creative and special than the other. But in this place, the cultural organizations have been able to stay and have site control and a network, and something that's special about this geography and its role related to rivers and natural things is that it's a good place to put this kind of thing. So that's almost my question. It's not what makes this place more creative, but what makes it functioning in 2025 and beyond, and also going back, in ways that if I were going to, imagine what a place could be, what kind of qualities would it need? Does it need to be near a river? Does it need to have, somebody to document it from outside? So I wonder what we do to make spaces like these robust and durable.
I think you do everything you can. I think that I agree that a lot of it has to do with proximity. I think, and I love that. Did you guys said it, taking artists outside of the community, out of the community? Somebody was talking about how we take artists from the community, right? Because I'm originally from Brooklyn. I live in the Bronx now, in a neighborhood that I was not allowed to go to as a kid because it was too dangerous. Now my apartment costs more than, it's more than I would ever think to pay for an apartment, right? But so I'm not just displaced by the problem, but I'm also a part of the problem, and there's no way to kind of escape that because we all need a place to live. But I think a part of what has made specifically the Lower East Side and other neighborhoods that kind of survived through it, like Bed-Stuy is kind of like that. There's parts of the Bronx that are still thriving, but a lot of that comes from, I think, the roots of being in these situations of survival where you have to depend on each other. Like a lot of creativity is born out of ingenuity, and creativity comes out of a necessity for something, right? And having to use what you have. And I'm sure there's enough of us who have heard make it work or make do, right? That was the way that you grew up in struggle, was making do and depending on others around you. So there's a lot of collaboration. I think that needs to, if that was something, but collaboration that's based on more than just your survival, like an intentional collaboration of I want to build this thing with you, and I know that, my liberation, your liberation are all bound together, right? Knowing that we're working for the same goal, even if that goal was a little different. there's an interesting thing, I think, that like, I forgot
Joy, glad you're bringing up this liberation is bound together, because something I've been thinking about, and there are probably people here at this table that know a lot more about it than me, is that, Fourth Arts Block was an organization that helped support and also advocated for all of the theaters on this block.
Yeah.
And to me, I'm sure there are other organizations that exist like that in the world, but when I first moved to New York back in 2007, that was mind-blowing to me, that there's an organization that exists solely to support other organizations to preserve the culture on one block. And maybe that's what's a little unique about this block, or what's a little unique about the Lower East Side, is the organizing capacity and also the willingness of groups to exist just to ensure that other groups who have been here in the past can continue, instead of just creating their own new thing, if that makes sense.
Can I ask you a follow-up question about the idea of play?
Sure.
Because of course, art is all, and making is also play. But, this idea of like practicing democracy in playground games, and my now 13-year-old child had no recess, had no free play. Most kids in New York City do not go into the street to play stickball or are unattended in a park, and you might get arrested if you left your child unattended in a park. Or
There'll be no more snow
some
days.
people might get arrested if you had no more snow days. And so, no more snow days. And so this idea of like unstructured play and democracy feels like actually really like it's disappearing. And I do think that that kind of role play and that question of how you explore power structures as children is important, and of course it's also in art making. But that to me, when we talk about this neighborhood, when a lot of these organizations were building up, these were like rent stabilized or low cost apartments, and people raised their families in this neighborhood and sent their kids to the local public schools, and maybe those kids had recess. And my kid had recess every other day for 20 minutes maybe. And at one point the school brought in an organization to teach them how to play, where they gave them a lot of rules about how to play, which is infuriating. And so I also am curious about right now we have this thriving space, but where are the families moving into this neighborhood? Can they afford it? No. Where are the kids going to school? Where are the kids playing? And then to sitting with a conversation around moving into the education space, and how do we bring joy and play into our art making for children, so that's something fun and joyful, and not just another kind of assignment.
Well, so a confession also, I'm not a parent, and all great questions. I want to also just say that when I think about play, I don't think about it just for young people. All kinds of cultural traditions have what one folklorist calls deep play. I'm thinking specifically of the Basque Indian tradition in New Orleans, like that. The amount of rules and designations within that community, and it's very you have to work your way up, you have to be part of it for a long time, it's passed down. There, from spy boys to the leaders to every flag boys. That's deep play. That's community perpetuating identity through, and there's a competitive element in between mass camps and groups, and also Juvet and Carnival, and in Siena, there's a festival every year where the neighborhoods each have their own flag and their own character, and it's a whole thing. But I think, so one thing I think is to take it back, have communities take that both responsibility and that privilege back from the structures, because I'm just watching, and I don't want to just be a city or caller, but we are unfortunately providing in some cases the entire art program in an entire school. And as much as I love that David Oquendo, who was one of the artists in the Buena Vista Social Club on Broadway, one of the main guitar players, is also an amazing teaching artist, and these kids are so lucky they get to have him as a teaching artist. I don't want City Lorby I don't want them to only have art in their class because we have this amazing teaching art roster, but because they got a grant that we were part of writing. That shouldn't be. That's not okay. And so I feel we
talk about having the Department of Education, all the things true, and like it's that, and I think though it is thinking about taking back control, not control, but providing alternate opportunities, and of course it takes time and money and putting a lot of these materials and permits, so I think with the Solid Pepe model, like take your living room and put it on the ground floor, like great idea. Take your living room, put it in the garden, great idea. And even that takes a lot to, having access to those spaces. It's not like it's just, you just take it somewhere. But I think just like off the top, I like totally with you, and then I'm like, think about it do like a 90-degree.
Well, we're getting back to the beginning of this conversation, but you're talking about democracy with a big D. We got to elect the right people. And I think we've got to start right now, for improving schools, for, affordable housing could be more coming online. You don't look hopeful.
Listen,
sorry.
I keep my hope wrapped up inside my chest, but on what you're saying about play, I think for me, right, and the largest part of my work these days centers around joy as intentional resistance, rest as a part of my everyday, to intentionally rest, intentionally be present, not be rushed, right, all of these things, but play is also a big part of my resistance. And the NAP ministry, there's so many places that go into this, but for several reasons, when you are still, the quickest way to become a victim is to be robbed of your imagination, to be separated from your imagination. If you can't dream, you cannot have hope. You have no hope, then you are done, right? And then there's also this aspect of curiosity, of engaging one's curiosity, and that play gives you, not just in children, but you carry that to your adulthood. Now you're not just saying, I know everything. You're well, maybe there's things I don't know, and you're not afraid to seek those answers and hear things that are different and be cooperative and be intentional about your choices. But I also, at least from my point of view, in my lived experience, play was always a big part of my family. I learned how to play every card game and board game from my grandparents. And my mom played with me, and I played with my kids, right? But what I noticed is that the world they're living in, because that is being shifted, they're being stripped of something I feel is essential. Not being able to imagine later on, not even next week, what you're doing next week, next year. To me, that's one of the saddest things happening. So I think play is something that's really, really essential for our survival as well. Because a lot of what you talked about is not just culture and play, but it's also historic remembrance. It's family trees, right? A lot of, my family comes from the Caribbean. So a lot of carnival and juve, the costumes you wear is something that has to do with your family's history that's passed down. Some costumes are passed down, those designs are made by hand, take months to make, right? So all of these things is a culture that you're passing on, but it's actually lived history, or a lived history that you still get to live in perpetually, right? And that contributes to, I think, what she was saying here earlier about how do we preserve these things? How do we fight against books being erased and things being destroyed? We live that history, make sure someone else knows about it.
Play is participating. Right? You can't be playing on the sidelines. To play means that you're actually doing it, you're participating in something. And it's evolutionarily essential. There's studies around how important play is for species to actually grow and evolve. There has to be play in order to change and mature.
I was just I was drawn in by the conversation about play. When I was had less resources, and now we have a space here, but I was working with theater, or making theater, interested in making theater. I really started working with young people a lot. And one of the reasons that I wanted to work with young people is because for them, making theater still was that fun. Whereas if I was working with young, career-oriented
actors, my play could be just a sort of a stepping stone for them. They were so driven because it is such an incredibly difficult field, so I understand that. But it made everything, it shifted the meaning, right, of everything. And I really loved working with teenagers, one, because they're very funny, they're very dark, they're very physical, they bundle up into each other. But they do understand play in a different way. They're not children anymore, but they're not yet out struggling with surviving in the world. I thought that their ability to play and play deep and play wholeheartedly was some of the most beautiful things about the work that they do.
What I hear is, play is essential, play is evolutionarily necessary, play is not a means to an end, but an end in and of itself. And one of the things I've been thinking of as well, we have said arts, that's not nice to have, not a must have, a nice to have. Play, well, we'll reduce recess so we can cram in more testing. It's a nice thing, we all love recess, but it's just a nice to have, not a must have. And now we're kind of stepping back as a society and saying, gosh, people are really sick physically and mentally. People are really lonely. People really don't know how to have a conversation. People don't know how to negotiate, physical boundaries in space. Well, what if the nice to have things were actually the most important must have things? And we thought there was coding. Everyone had to learn coding. That was the must have thing. Well, now there's a robot that does that for you. So let's start to go back to play and these nice to haves.
But you see, I think the problem is that we're too reductionist about these things. I was a runaway. I was born down here, but I was a runaway and I got a job at the Strand at 17. And then I stole books on the street. And the first day I sold books on the street, I made more money than I did in a week in the Strand. A couple of years later, a guy walked up to me and said, "Can I sell books next to you?" And I said, "Well, it's a public sidewalk. I guess you can." And that was Steve Buscemi. And he sold books next to me for 3 years. He'd already been a firefighter. And that's what the neighborhood was like. That was on the Astor Place Q. We would get hassled by the police because there were people buying co-ops in the neighborhood, and they didn't want to see people selling books on the street. But we kept doing it, and he did that because he wanted to learn the streets. He worked at the 2nd Avenue Deli as a waiter, and was it 2nd Avenue? Yeah, it was the 2nd or 1st Avenue Deli. And 2nd Avenue Deli. And I worked at the Nation as a clerk at the time, and so I was all over the place. I was over at the doors working there. But it was a community where you could just go and do something. I was tired of working in that filthy bookstore. So I just set books up on a table and started selling books. That's the kind of community you need to build and have the confidence to build. And I got that not from here, but my mother she came here to be an actor. And she did what you guys did back in the 50s. She was a Shakespearean trained actor from Michigan, Wisconsin, one of the 100 most successful small farm communities in America. And that's where I learned how to have the confidence to go out and sell books on the street. What you don't have here is because of the stinking English. If you want to read a great book about the dilemmas in the Northeast, read Down and Out in Paris and London by George Orwell, where what you need to do is be able to have a sense of community, like the French or like the Continentals, as opposed to the English who are so reductionist. They put everything in a box. Do you ever take a look at the student guide at Hunter College? It's as thick as a telephone book. There's so many different departments. When I went to Hunter College, we had Black Studies, African American Studies, and Black and Puerto Rican Studies. We had 3 different departments for African Americans. We do too much of that. We do too much of that because we're conditioned to accept that that's that's the way the system's supposed to be. But that's not us. That's filling in the boxes. That's not what builds a community. And now we've got a problem where we've got a population decline among young people. We've got 25% of the seats are going to be empty. We've got private colleges where they're ending the philosophy departments and opening up departments in cybersecurity instead. And we have the arts, which are always about who? Returning the poor to a state of nature. That's what the arts are about. Because that's where all of you came from. You all came from, you're not the endowmentists at Harvard. You're not the endowment at NYU. You're the people who express themselves, but you're not necessarily the people who are going to be able to provide for the next generation. We're in a demographic bubble. We had 1,200 vacant buildings here between Houston and 14th Street, east of Broadway. When I was at the Strand, we did a walking tour with people from the Voice. That's how we were able to build this neighborhood. But now look at it, it's posh. It's just like the East End of London. They didn't told the buildings that were bombed out in World War II weren't cleared out until 1968 in London. And that's how that neighborhood was created. What we have to do is find a way to be more able to bring in the people from the region and not be as posh. I don't know if that's possible. But or we're going to die. And then we have to help other communities like Allentown or other areas around all these Rust Belt towns where I hear there are all those people out there, they went out to the countryside and they built. This is going to be a hub, hopefully, for larger satellites around the region. But we have to build that sort of confidence to be able to do things. Because if we still stay in the Anglo-English system, that's what's going to kill us. Go to Maine, it's dead. There's nothing up there. It's really scary. Because the Rust Belt just takes over and people wait for orders. You can't wait for orders. Steve Buscemi didn't wait for orders. He said, like, look, I want to find out what the streets are like. So I'm going to go out and sell books on the street. And he did. And that's what you got to do. You got to take risks. I'm going to shut up for now. That's it.
I feel like that kind of directly relates to play though. To, again, to be afraid to take a risk is because no one encouraged your curiosity. No one nurtured your confidence. No one poured into you to say you can do this thing, or you were never put into such a hard position that you had to fight and find that scrappiness, right? Like a lot of the culture we talk about that we love in New York, hip hop specifically, comes out of a place of struggle. Salsa, bachata, all of that comes out of people struggling and still needing to hold on to their love, their hope, their roots, their dreams, right? So when you get a culture that you love, but then now people can be bought out of the neighborhood, people can be displaced. They still have not built the affordable housing in downtown Brooklyn that was promised so that Barclay Center could get built. You understand that this is 20 years later, 10 years later, they still have not built that housing for people. So it's yes, some people are afraid to take risks, but again, a lot of people are very comfortable not taking those risks because they're still very dedicated to being successful in capitalism. And what you talk about us needing to do less of, I feel like we need to really, really be, yes, less Anglo-Saxon, but less of a conquering mindset, of a dominant mindset. I must dominate, I must conquer. How much more do you have to conquer? How much more do we have to dominate before we just destroy the planet and each other? There has to be a point where we're all right, I'm good divesting from capitalism or from these systems that I know do not help anybody.